Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Welcome back to College Knowledge. Very excited today. We have the distinguished pleasure of interviewing Dale Bittinger. He is the Assistant Vice Provost at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He's been in higher education for over 25 years, serving in a variety of roles. He's been on boards galore. He serves as a board member of the Common Application Board of Directors right now, and we'll get into that story in a bit, but he's a wealth of knowledge.
So I guess the 25 years, there's going to be a lot of knowledge, but I always like to know a little bit about how did you get into this when you were in high school, when you were going to college? Did you know that this is where you were going to be? How'd you get down to this road to where you're at today?
It's funny because 25 years ago, I don't think anyone was ever saying that I wanted to work in college. Now, I'm like, it's the greatest thing in the world to me. People often say, whether right or wrong, college is the best years of your life. That puts a lot of pressure on kids when you think about that. And I'm like, I don't know what the answer to that question is. But what I can tell you is I'm over 50 and I'm still in college. So I'm pretty happy with what I do.
Now, there was some foreshadowing because in 2007, you were named the top 10 influential admissions deans and directors. You didn't hesitate when you got in to make waves.
The way I got into the profession, I think what has served me well is I was fortunate to have people that took me under their wing early on in their careers, mentors like many of us who have had some level of success, have had people that have taken us under the wings. I rely a lot on a background in athletics, and I view myself as a coach in everything I do, whether right or wrong. People sometimes are like, I didn't get that. And I realize, okay, let me break it down another way. When you asked me how I first got into this, Joe, I thought I was going to be a high school counselor and a coach. And I got an assistantship like many of us in grad school that led me to the academic advising realm. And then I worked at Baltimore City Community College, an urban institution that is 85% students of color, which was a great experience. I would encourage all of us to sit in the seat where we are not in the majority to get that feeling. And that is where I first really started with some folks that took me under their wing. I followed my mentor, this lady, Myrtle Dorsey, to a community college, came back to Baltimore, UMBC, and one of the reasons I've been here at UMBC, and to your question, Dave, so long, we have a leader like Freeman Rabowski, our former president emeriti. You can learn a lot from him, and that allows you to do great things and to jump in and to get some recognition. And I often say the recognition is not always about the person, it's really the institution they serve.
Yeah. When you got into higher education, what roles have you held in higher ed so that people know the sort of broad brushstroke of what your knowledge base is?
I started off as what was called a retention specialist at Baltimore City Community College, which is an academic advisor. From there, the lady, Myrtle Dorsey, whom I mentioned, asked me to be her assistant too. So early on in my career. So back then they were called assistant twos. I think today a lot of people would call them chief of staff. And I even remember asking her a question, and something that still resonates with me today so much. If I move into this position in administration, I still get to work with students. And one of the things she said to me is, if you want to work with students, you will always find a way. And she became the president of a couple community colleges. She did that, and I've always found a way to stay in touch with students. I followed her to Atlanta, DeKalb College. It became Georgia Perimeter College, a community college of 25,000 students. I was their very first interim VP for enrollment management. I was in that role for a while, decided Baltimore really was home, came back and started here at UMBC with my background in community colleges, working in transfer admissions, picked up more recruitment responsibilities, picked up more operations responsibilities that led to the director position, and then ultimately being our AVP.
Awesome. So you've really touched most of the facets of the getting students, keeping students, making sure that they're thriving, right? As the areas that you've really touched. So we love to talk about enrollment management just because it is such a necessary component. And I like people to understand, what does enrollment management mean specifically at your school? And then if you have a broader approach to it, I'd take that too.
That is a great question that I always love answering. And I think it's neat, and I get to tell my story about that because enrollment management is making sure that we successfully recruit and graduate students. A lot of times people look at admissions and coming in the front door and colleges meeting their numbers. No, I want to be comfortable. And I think where my background serves me well is in working with advising in those facets is that successful retention of students and ultimately graduation of students starts with the right recruitment of students. And so one of the things I often say, we've done our job properly in admissions, not when we get you to come to UMBC. I love this place. It's when we have authentically represented who we are as an institution, our values, so you have a really good understanding of who we are. And if that works for you, great. If it doesn't, I understand as well. I think probably 95% of the time, the students who know a little bit about us, they know it's a great place. We're known for our inclusive excellence. We have students who come here. I always remember a marketing consultant said to us once, a lot of your students that choose UMBC are very mature in high school and they swam upstream. They weren't worried about what everyone else was doing on the weekends. And then they come here and now they're not swimming upstream anymore. They're swimming with the fishes and they take off. And that's a really cool analogy, and to see it in our students, to do that is one of the things I love. And that's what enrollment management is about. It's helping people find how they can be swimming with the fishes wherever that might be.
And on the maybe not so glorious side of it, there is management of, you have to have a certain number of students. You got to fill your class, right? You've got to have a certain yield. You have to have the dining halls got to be ready to rock and roll. The beds got to be filled. And the business end of college takes place there too. And you're sort of tasked with the balance of those two. Is that an accurate statement?
100%. I often say, when you sit in the admissions seat, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You have to have enough to pay the bills, but you can't have them sitting in the hallways for classes. And so it is very much a sweet spot that you have to rely on. And that's where, there's a lot of data analysis that goes into place, a lot of management of wait lists, a lot of art and science coming together to land where you need to, that sometimes we have to tell some really good students there may not be a spot for them. But I think that's some of the most important work we do too. Going back to Joe's first question, I have a couple master's degrees. One is in public policy, the other's in counseling. And I share with staff, some of the most important things we do is when students may not be admitted, it's to help them understand there are still different paths. And it might be starting elsewhere, a smaller college, a community college, but we don't want to be dream crushers. That's not our job. We're admissions officers. We're not admissions and rejections officers. So we want to help people obtain an education, a higher education degree in whatever way or form that might be.
We've talked about this before, especially with mental health, where it's at now, that the idea that when you do, say, rejected or you're not accepted to a school, I think there's this, I'll say, demeanor that sometimes high school students feel like they're not good enough, right? Oh, it's me. And I think that is a myth that a lot of parents and especially students need to understand. Can you elaborate? Am I right in that? Am I wrong in that?
100%. However, we have evolved to be, and I think it's one of the reasons you now see this increase in direct admissions programs. Our students have become risk averse, and being told no is very hard for them. And it's a balancing act. And I even try to figure it out in my own mind. I don't want to create hurdles, but I also know as a lifelong educator, sometimes when we face adversity, that's when we grow the most.
And that's where I wanted to go with that, because I feel like that lack of adversity that we face now, because we're trying to protect from everything, it manifests later now. And it manifests when your first boss comes in and says, you did this wrong. And the kid says, well, my boss yelled at me. And it's like, no, corrective action is not always yelling.
And that's where when I talked earlier about being like a coach, I'm old school in that regard, where if a coach stopped talking to you or stopped being on you, that's when you should be worried. If they're talking to you, trying to coach you up, that's a good thing. And that's one of the things that I think students have somehow tied their worth to where they get into school, and maybe just didn't get the answer you wanted.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up coaching. We are both coaches.
Yep. Oh, okay.
A lot of things. We not only coach professionally, we coach clients, we coach students, but we also coach our kids and their sports teams. I had an interesting lesson last year. I coach a highly competitive travel softball team. They're girls, and I was a boy with a brother. I didn't have any girls and so I have 3 daughters. That's how the world works. And I love them all. They're awesome. But they came together and they pulled me aside and they said, sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I thought about it for a minute because I'm a very passionate coach. You get me in between the lines, like I'm on it. They said, sometimes you come off like you're mad. And I'm like, I'm never mad. I'm never mad about athletic performance. I'm always passionate. I'm always excitable. Now when I'll be hitting fungos or whatever and doing infield, outfield to the team, and I'll be barking and hollering and, hey, you got to get behind that ball, adjust the feet so you're going towards the base. And I'll stop and I'll say, I'm not mad. I'm just passionate. This is me coaching in the moment. Nobody take this personally. And oddly enough, with great effect. They love knowing that I'm not actually mad. And I never thought about it until they pulled me aside.
I am a proud girl dad of 3 girls as well. So we are there together, coached a really competitive girls travel basketball team. Out of the 12, 13 girls on the team, I think 9 or 10 are playing D1 sports now, most in lacrosse. We're in Maryland. In fact, I was a baseball player. So when I played lacrosse with my daughters, I used my baseball glove and they threw with their sticks because I can't throw with a lacrosse stick.
I thought it was crab cakes and football.
Yeah, it's crab cakes and lacrosse where we live. But it was funny because I taught my girls, and this was very important to me as a girl dad and as a coach, that there's certain things anyone can sprint out onto the field as hard as they can. Anyone can keep their head in the huddle, in the dugout, whatever it might be, and anyone can be a good teammate. Everything else falls into place after that. And it's basically, my message was, and what I love about sports again is it teaches you life lessons.
Certainly
Everything
does.
you learn on the field, it carries over when that boss gives you that first criticism or what you think is criticism and yelling. No, it's what my coach has done with me for so many years.
100%.
And I had a great piece of advice from our former vice president here at UMBC. Early on in my career, she asked me, she's like, Dale, how are your girls doing? And I said, good. I said, my oldest is really competitive. I said, I probably need to tone that down a little bit. And she looked at me and said, would you say that if she were a boy? And ever since then, I coached my girls like they were boys. And I always was coaching them up with that same fire. Like you said, between the lines, I'm cheering, yelling, but I am their biggest backer. And it's now that some of them are in college and even in high school, the other groups that I coached, they come up to me and they're like, Coach Dale. And that is one of the greatest rewards I have. And I had to ask my daughters, I'm like, are they punking me? And she's, no, Dad, you were a big part of their lives. Like basketball was a big part of their growing up. So it's one of the great things we do. So we're educators in the work we do, but also in our other lives.
And I think there's a great correlation. And this is not to say that people that don't participate in athletics aren't going to get this somewhere else. But in athletics, the end of the game deals the adversity. You win, you lose. That's how it goes. And so once you get past about 6 or 7 years old, there's always a winner and a loser. So that sort of repetitive, get back up on your feet. You lost the game. You got another one to play. That adversity, I think, is, and again, it's why I try and recruit a lot of former athletes in the business that we're in.
And there are times you walk off the field and you win, and you may not feel good about it, and you can walk off the field and lose, but you know what? The other team was just better than us today, and that's the way it is.
And just tie it together from an enrollment management standpoint, do things like being an athlete, being on a high school team, does that hold weight to an admissions officer to potentially get in because you may have had some of those experiences? Does that, things like that hold weight, those extracurriculars?
One of the things that I always love is the stories that the media portrays about how people get into college and all the things they've said and done.
The worst.
And I'm like, the reality is I could spend a morning with someone and they could easily make 2/3 to 3/4 of our admissions decisions. Because if you have a 4.0 and a 1500 on the SATs, you're probably going to be admissible because you've also probably done other things that help make you a well-rounded applicant. And then on the same token, when you have an 800 and a 2.1, you might not be successful at least starting off, and you might go a different route. And so what I often say is when people are looking at their essay, their extracurriculars, if you spent all the time in the classroom that you spent in trying to write a 600-word essay or be in all these clubs, it would have paid off with what we would have seen in the transcript. To answer your question, Joe, I think for 2/3 of students, we know their admissibility regardless of what they do in and outside of the classroom. But for that 1/3, and you don't know where you fall in these different buckets. And with any institution, there's going to be a top third, a bottom third, and a middle third. That middle third is where these other activities become really important. And we look at them and see, hey, you know what? Maybe this student had a 3.0, but they also were taking care of their family and they had a lot of these other things. So it's not just about the clubs, but what is it was going on in your life?
We had a conversation with an admissions admissions officer at a different school, and he made the point that I'd never really latched onto until he had said it, which was like, sometimes kids don't have the opportunity to do the sport, to do the activity. Sometimes they've got to go work to make money so that they can afford to do anything because their parents don't have it. Or sometimes they do have to stay home and take care of their younger siblings because both parents are out working and they just don't get those opportunities. What do you recommend to a student in that situation and how to display that?
I think the Common App is doing some really cool work in that space where they've done some research and partnered with some folks to pull some of those questions into the application. But that's also when you are writing your essays and you have an opportunity to tell your story, that becomes your story. I actually feel really good about a student who's worked really hard in high school, gets out of school, has to go to work to pay the bills, to do what they need to do, because they know what it means to put your head down and work hard. And many of us and many of our children are privileged and they may not have to do that. But it's a different work ethic when that is required. And there's something to be said for wanting something. And international students, I always say, is a great example of that. We're a campus that has a large international population. In the United States, we're fortunate. We probably are in the country that has the best higher education system in the world. People take for granted after 12th grade, in many cases, you go on to college. People in other parts of the world don't. So they come here for our system. Their success allows their family future success back in their country. When you tie all of this in, we all have our story. And that's what we do in admissions. And I think that's one of the beauties of our profession. There's an art and a science. And sometimes that's what you're trying to figure out and you're trying to tease out. A lot of people, it's very simple. And others, that's why we have a group that looks at these and tries to make these decisions.
Yeah, so getting a little more tactical on that piece, when it comes down to, I've always assumed that beginning of the admissions process it's relatively platonic and ins and outs and yeses and nos, and it's doors are open for business, let's fill it up. And then as you start to get to, I don't know, whatever percentage full, does it get more technical? Does it get more in depth once you've got 66% of the class or 60% of the people out there? Do you start to get a little more deep in that?
100%. And that's one of the reasons, like for us at UMBC, we have an early action program. And one of the things with early action is when the gates open, as you talked about, we start filling the class. And we know what we have as our enrollment targets. And that's based upon yields, kind of like the analogy we often use is the airplane model. We're going to overbook. And if everyone were to accept us on our offers of admission, we would be bursting at the seams. But we come out of the gate strong and we see how many early action applicants we have. And then as we move through the process, we have our regular decision deadlines where we start backfilling to get to that goal. And then as we move in the last month or two of the process is when we go to that wait list. And that's when we are in committee review and we're spending time looking at students and what does this GPA mean? What type of curriculum did they take? What type of extracurriculars did they have? Is it really an engagement or is it something they're just listing on the application? And so, those early round of early actions, there's probably a lot less time spent on those. But as you get to the wait list, like when we start coming up in file reviews and we might review these multiple times, we start remembering them in our heads because we've talked about them so much.
Yeah, interesting.
And I just wanted to clarify something there. I believe I'm right. But if somebody did file early action, it is possible for them to be deferred and then all of a sudden be on that wait list. So just because you're in that early action realm doesn't mean it's a yes or no right away. You could be one people really looked at for a while, right?
Correct. And in fact, we say we don't even like to give students bad news before the holidays. That's when we release our early action decisions. And so, look, I don't want to tell you on December 20th, no. We're going to roll you over to regular decision, defer, and then we're going to redo the pool, look at it again in early February, lather, rinse, and repeat, do it again in March with the wait list.
Yeah. So mention the Common App, and obviously the Common App used by a lot, but I've actually had this question asked 3 times by families this week. And I guess you were probably one of the best people to ask because you sit on multiple chairs for this question. Families looking, is students applying to 10 schools or so, and they're all Common App, but they have their top choice. And the question is, should I do that school's application versus the Common App? Is there a difference? Does it make me look like I'm more interested, or does it look like I'm taking the easy way if I do the Common App? Your take on that?
Great question, Joe, and I'm glad that we can get the word out about that. First off, when I'm involved with the Common App board, that also means that I do not make admissions decisions for all these schools. People come up all the time and are like, can you help me with this? No, we're a governing body. And when you apply to the Common App, you can list up to 20 schools. And the reality is when you apply for the Common App, One of the things of joining membership is you indicate you will not give preferential treatment to your own app or other apps if you use the Common App. We don't know the other schools to whom you're applying, and so it is not a disadvantage at all. So if X school has their own application versus the Common App. In fact, schools are not allowed to do that according to the agreements that we sign. It's really an efficiency for students, and it's an efficiency for many cases for us as well on an admissions office.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to process different applications that require different technical and operational support.
Yeah.
Interesting. And from your board position, do you feel that is adhered to at all schools?
I would like to think so. I would really like to think so. I really believe most of us that have gone into this profession do it for the right reasons, don't want to be gaming. I'm sure, probably like in anything in life, there are some outliers, but I would be confident in saying the majority do. I'd like to think all do.
We recently heard Georgetown is now using the Common App.
That's been, I think, years in the making for Charlie Deacon, who's been dean at Georgetown forever, to come over. And I think students and high school counselors and many were excited when the news was announced.
Any insight as to what made them finally make the switch? Any thoughts or opinions?
Georgetown's always gone to the beat of their own drummer with the work they've done. They have built up a great institution. Charlie Deacon, as their dean, has sat in that seat for many, many years. And I think that's the way he thought was best for the institution.
Got it. Fair enough. So how many schools, number one, are on the Common App?
A little over 1,100 right now.
Little over 1,100.
I think that's it, maybe 13, but one of those two numbers.
Can you use the Common App for early action? Can you use it for all the different admission sequences at those schools?
Yes. So you can use it early action, early decision. It's tied into other systems, whether it be like Naviance and Score. So if there is an early decision agreement that needs to be signed, it can be launched through those mechanisms and it's all tied together. So, yep, any one of those mechanisms. And the big thing now the Common App has announced is community colleges are coming on board. Once again, when students go through the admissions pipeline, a lot of times we think of admissions as a high school to college, maybe high school to community college, to 4-year. Mm-hmm. But the reality is there's a lot of swirl. High school, community college, 4-year, back to a 2-year to pick a class up in the summer because of cost or where you live, back to 4-year. So the more that you can have information in one spot, the better off it's going to be for students. And especially in the state of Maryland now, we have a lot of students who complete dual enrollment programs and they're not even sure how to apply. They're like, do I use the first year application for freshmen or do I use a transfer application? And that becomes a whole education process. It's like, you want to apply as a first year student. That's where most institutions' resources are dedicated. The wraparound services like orientation, guaranteed housing. So it's another thing that's worthwhile to have community colleges come on board with the Common App.
Just to put an exclamation point on that, if they're technically probably able to apply not as a first year student, but then they lose all the benefits and guarantees of the first year student, is that accurate to say?
We will, at our institution, we will go back and let's just say they erroneously apply as a transfer student. We will move them, we will reach out to them, make sure that they are able to get what they want and explain to them. Sometimes they want to be a transfer. I'm like, no, you don't. Here's why. It sounds great that you're a junior coming in or a sophomore coming in, and that might be because of AP credits or other things along those lines. But no, it's fine to come in as this. And if, it's a freshman advanced standing is what we like to call them. But don't worry about like your credit count right now. It's fine for these other purposes.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up, anything, again, with your years of experience that you mentioned, like hey, let's dispel this myth right here and now. Is there anything just from, I would say, the general college admissions process we didn't touch on today that parents and students should know that it's something that you're constantly trying to get this message across that we didn't talk about yet today?
I think one of the things that I have learned having sat in this seat and then having gone through it with a couple of my daughters, I guess 2 points I would hit upon is one, the stress our students are under when they go through this. I think we talk about it, but we don't really know it. And I didn't know it till I lived it. And it's important to meet our kids where they are. And I'm very close with my daughters. And I always remember my oldest, and her process looked a little bit different because she was a recruited athlete. And I was talking to her about like what the coaches were saying. And I wasn't getting a lot of information from her. And then one night I came home from work and she's like, Dad, I was thinking. And the next thing I'm standing there 45 minutes later at the top of the steps. And she's done this complete brain dump with her mother and me talking about everything that was in her mind. And so we can't always force our students to have the conversations when we want them to have it. They need to have it when they're ready. The other thing, and my daughter's grown up in a higher ed environment. She runs around a college campus. I also realized the stress they're under when she was applying and completing her Common App. She texted me at work and she literally said, "Dad, are you employed?" And this is my firstborn daughter who checks all the boxes of a firstborn: rule follower, does what she's supposed to, has her act together, boom. But she lost her everlasting mind from what she's seen me doing for the last 20 years because of the stress of asking a simple question on an application that she knows the answer to.
Yeah.
And so that to me was a telltale sign. The other thing that I think about, and I alluded it to a little bit earlier in when I first talked, was I think one of the things we often say is college is the best years of your life when you're about asking me professionally. I think for many people it is, but for many people it may not be. And I think that's a message we may have to tone down a little bit because it sets up the expectation so much for our students that when they go in. And now you're seeing more and more data about students being lonely and adjusting and all these other things. And I think it's because we have raised the bar so high and the expectations so high for students that I don't even know if it can be reached.
Interesting. I think another understated piece of that is that it is a massive change, right? The question I tell parents all the time is when you ask your child where they want to go, you're asking two questions they are not prepared to answer, which is number one, where's the first place they're going to live when they move out of the house? And number two, what do they want to do for the rest of their lives? And so when you think about that, the culmination of the college decision, that's what you're really asking. And that's the pressure they feel on it. Whether right or wrong, ignorance is bliss. It is what it is. It is not that. But you are asking those two questions to that underdeveloped mind.
And there's no context behind it. I've often said that's one of the worst things we do is ask a 17 or 18-year-old what you want to do when you grow up. And you've added the point, Dave, about, of now you got to find another place to live. One of the things I often encourage families to do, and this is more so after a student has been admitted, but maybe we should talk about it more in the front end, is what are your values? And figuring out what those values are as it relates to college. Then start looking at colleges that check those boxes. Because a lot of people are like, hey, I want to go to this college, but they can't tell you why. They just know about it from someone, somehow, some way.
I call it the sweatshirt rule, right? That you go to the first school you go to, they buy the sweatshirt, and for whatever reason, that's the creme de la creme. They wear it for no particular reason at all. No refined research, no pointed opinion as to why it brings the value that they look for. And I think it's a dangerous thing. And I'll also add to that, we're in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. And I don't know if you know about Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania loves Penn State. They just love Penn State, as Maryland loves Maryland.
Yep.
But there is this like downward. I went to Penn State. My dad went to Penn, and Penn State's the role. And I was victim of it, but I pulled away. I went to Franklin and Marshall, which is a small private school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Great school.
It was a pain. It was difficult. But the rest of my family is all Penn Staters. And so I think that there's this other component where the child wants to make the parent proud. Therefore, the alma mater is certainly in consideration. And I'm okay with it being in consideration. I'm just not, I don't think that, like, I would have gotten lost at Penn State. There's no question.
I will, once again, our connections keep going, Dave, because my daughters, when I talk about them, they're at St. Joe's in Philly, which love is a great school. And it is the perfect fit for them for the point you alluded to. The 6,000 is a match of who they are as a person, where they can advocate for themselves, where they can get to know their professors. There's a community on that campus that is what our family has valued, is what they've experienced in high school, and what has allowed them to have a great success so far in college. And I think if they went to a school of Penn State, and you know what, there are some people that like that environment, but they wouldn't have thrived, and they were able to make their own choice because of that. And luckily for me, they didn't want to follow where I'd gone to school.
I need to throw this out there so that nobody pulling their hair out right now. I'm not saying anything negative about Penn State. It's not for everyone, just like every school. We call it the trifecta of fit, the financial, academic, and social fit. That's what we're trying to guide families to. Find that one that is in the sweet spot, and the child is more successful. They're more engaged on campus. They love the classwork, and financially you can afford it and it doesn't break the bank, right?
100%. And it's like anything in life. If you find something that you love in your job, in your personal life, you're going to be successful at it because it's enjoyable. And as you said, I will never throw shade to any of my colleagues, campuses, anyone else. It's all about what when our work is finding the place that allows you to take off and flourish in whatever way, shape, or form that is.
Yeah, we call it a successful launch, right? That's what
Yeah.
everybody walks in our front door and listens to this podcast because what they're trying to provide for their student is a successful launch into the next step of their career. And I'm just going to put a capstone on the end of this. To me, the most important thing that a child can do in college is learn how to learn effectively.
Yeah.
Because once college stops, the real world starts and you're learning all over again. Whether you have the core knowledge, your first job, it's not going to be getting into a textbook and taking an exam. Your first job is going to be applying your ability to learn on the go to create success.
And I think that's part of the college story. Do I remember that exact thing that I was taught in class? Maybe not, but it is the concepts, the ability to apply. And it's not always just in the classroom. It's all your experiences on a college campus, whether with an athletic team, a music or ensemble, a club organization. And I think sometimes in higher ed, that's where we've lost our messaging, that these are the benefits that you have of that experience.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
I think this was fantastic. I'm tapped out and you've given me a lot to think about. And I think that this is one of those episodes that it just is in between the lines for people. Here's what you need to know. It's great insight. And we didn't mean to pump up UMBC because it's a great institution in its own right. But I think your insight on the global side of higher ed is awesome as well. So thank you very much for that.
I work at a great institution that does great work. And I also love the profession I do and to help people in navigating this. Always glad to do that too.
Awesome. Dale, thank you so much. This has been College Knowledge with Dale Bittinger, who is the Vice Provost at UMBC.